Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk specifically about what is a reasonable size for a tabletop role-playing game core rulebook physically printed, okay? Now, the reason we're going to talk about this today is we have seen some very unreasonable printings recently, in my opinion. Two in particular are the Pathfinder 2 book. It is 640 pages. 640 pages. That is a lot of pages, right? Like, it's just a lot, right? And it's a behemoth. Like, this book, like, you put this sucker in a backpack, it better be one of those good ones that has double stitched. You know, it's significant, right? Pathfinder 2 isn't even the biggest role-playing game, tabletop role-playing game that is on FLGS shelves that you can find in print fairly easily, right? At a local game shop or at Barnes & Nobles. The other one is Zweihander. Zweihander's been pretty big recently. Well, it's been a very popular game recently. That game is 672 pages long. 672 pages long. That is a lot, right? Like, it's significant, right? That is approaching 700 pages. Like, these are extremely long books, right? So today I want to talk about what are the benefits and what are the problems of these large print tabletop role-playing game core rule books, right? And I want to also say what is a reasonable size, right? Now, in my opinion, I'll say the reasonable size now because that's the point of this entire video. I think the industry should really cap at 499 pages, right? Like, I really don't think books should be being printed over 500 pages long. It's a bad idea. I really just feel at an industry level, it's a bad idea. Now, no one should stop any of these publishers from doing this, but I think, you know, there is a community of game designers, and I think game designers should be just looking at each other and saying, hey, you know, this is approaching madness, right? Like, because one of the things is, you know, from a technical perspective, it's clear that you can print books as large as you want now. So the reasons why we have this strange problem right now is these gigantic tabletop role-playing game core rule books, right? And the two main offenders right now are Pathfinder 2 and Zweihander tabletop role-playing game. Zweihander it's a Grim and Perilous RPG, right? And both those books are over 600 pages long. It's really something. All right, so what are the benefits? There are some benefits. Let's talk about the benefits first, right? So clearly, in my opinion, the problems outweigh the benefits, or I wouldn't say that we should be capping at 499, right? So let's talk about it. So what are the benefits, right? There are specifically 3 benefits. Location is one of those benefits, options is a benefit, and value, all right? So what is location? So some people do have a location restriction when they play tabletop role-playing games, which means that they are at remote locations, or and like a good example of that is college, right? So if you're at college, having a good a single core rule book where, you know, all the rules of the book and lots of options for the dungeon master, lots of monsters are in the book, lots of dungeon master options, lots of player options, lots of monsters, right? That serves both the players and the DMs, mostly because you have beasts in there. But that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. So if for somebody who's off at college, having one book that easily transports back and forth, because, you know, when you're at college, you're going to be coming in, you're going to be coming out, you can't really leave your stuff. That's, you know, having one book is really helpful. I totally get that, right? Another one is, and I've been thinking a lot more about this when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, is prisons, right? Like, America's got a few million people, like low millions. Like, I think there's 2 or 3 million people that are in prison, right? It's a pretty significant amount of people, right? And so jails and prisons, right? Like, what do you do with people who, now to me, you know, I'm a human being and I love all other human beings, and I think it's really good idea to have, to make tabletop role-playing games accessible to prisoners. I think it's a really great idea because you can let them kind of, live in different worlds, because the world they live in is pretty bad, right? Like, you're on lockdown, right? So if you have a book that can open up a million worlds to you, that seems pretty awesome. I think that's a really nice way to think about it. So for prisoners, these huge books that give tons of options are really good, right? Like they really are very, very helpful, right? And they can kind of help transport these people. And in a prison, it would be very difficult. Every keeping a book per prisoner or even per group is challenging. So if you can just have one book, right, and 5 people can play a game of Pathfinder 2 or Zweihander, that's a pretty big deal off of one book. That's a really good thing, right? So I think you need to think about that, right? Options. These big books give tons of options. They give tons of options to players, the dungeon master, more characters, more character options, more lineage options, all those kind of things. It's a big deal, right? It's really a very helpful aspect of these larger books, right? And then the last one is value, right? Because we do use technology really well today, and these large books are easier and easier for publishers to create. They're not really that challenging, right? And you can create them at, this is incredible to me. You can buy Zweihander right now on Amazon.com, a 672-page hardback for $38. That's a big deal, right? That's a pretty darn good deal, right? That's pretty crazy, right? So they're a good value. All of that is definitely in the mix, right? So what are the problems overall with having these longer books, right? Well, basically, it's 3 specific things. It's literacy, it's time, and it's it's a false indicator of complexity. All right. So I would say, literacy, time, and false. Let's bounce these out, right? So literacy is a big deal. If you have a 672-page book, when you introduce somebody to the game, they're going to be like, "Whoa, that's a lot. That's a big book, right?" So it's really challenging, right? And frankly, it is an unstated challenge to someone's literacy. And frankly, I love 672-page books, but not everybody does, right? And the reality is, if your game is a 672-page core rulebook, there's no question that's going to reduce the number of players that are willing to play that simply based on their literacy level, right? Because the reality is, many people don't have the patience for 672-page books. That's a fact, right? There's just no two ways around that. All right, time, right? Here's a big one, right? So, what if you have people who are like, "Yeah, I'm super literate. I love books, and I read long books, right?" But the reality is, I'm also, because I read long books, I have a robust group of friends, and I have a nice family, and I have a good job, and and I have all the benefits that super dope literacy brings, right? Which means I don't have a lot of time, all right? And so that could be another issue, right? So you can find somebody who's literate, but simply literally doesn't have the time to read the book that you need them to read in order to play the game, right? And also, I've definitely heard that, they don't need to read the whole book, they can just read a little bit, but the reality is, that could cause problems, because there'll be players at the table who will kind of scoff at the other people's ignorance. Most people who are willing to play tabletop role-playing games are susceptible to that kind of scoffery, and it can be a big issue, right? So the last one is a false indication of complexity, right? When you see a 672-page book, you're like, "Oh my goodness, this must be really crunchy and incredibly complex," right? But the reality is, more and more right lately, many, many, many games are really quite rules light, but have massive page counts. So one of the biggest problems in tabletop role-playing games right now is there's a ton of world building being done in these tabletop role-playing game books, right? So a lot of times you just have a lot of setting information, a lot of monsters, right? Having more monsters really I don't think it really raises the complexity of a game that much, right? And the reality is, you can have a ton of content. The best example of this I've ever seen is Shadowrun Anarchy. Shadowrun Anarchy, I got excited for about a New York second when Shadowrun was like, "We really need a rules light version of our game," and then produced a 250-page book, right? It's literally saying, "I'm rules light. Here's the 250-page book." Come on, did anybody even do just a generic check, right? If your rules light, you darn well better be below 99 pages. And frankly, since Fate has already made Fate Accelerated, which is an amazing game, at 50 pages, you should be under 50 pages if you're calling yourself rules light, right? But the reality is, there are a ton. Like my favorite tabletop role-playing game next to Dungeons & Dragons is Index Card RPG. That game clocks in at like 250, 270, right? And that is truly a rules-like game, right? But one of the things is it will allow fantasy play and it will allow sci-fi play, right? And there's a really robust section in there on Dungeons and on being a good dungeon master, which I think, frankly, challenges Sly Flourish for what he's throwing down, right? So like that's a great book. It's rules light. There are a ton, and so the idea is, even though these books are long, often their complexity is not high. So I think there's a lot of in the industry right now. There's a lot of false indicators of complexity through page length, but the rules really aren't that complex, right? And so, but when players, especially new players, or even players who have been around for a long time, but they don't know this new book they're bringing to you, when they see a 670-page book, they're going to, that's high complexity. I'm not going to, and they might not tell you, right? That's another thing is like, everybody's like, just have the conversation. But the reality is a lot of communication is not verbal, right? And frankly, I'm really dyed in the wool like that. A lot of communication is nonverbal, right? And the reality is, a lot of people think that they're going to solve everything with a conversation. That's really not the case often, right? You need to understand who people are and what they are. And frankly, you pull out a 670-page book, you think that that's going to be like that people are going to be excited about that? Literacy, time, false indicator of complexity. These problems, in my opinion, truly outweigh the benefits that you get for location, that you get for options, and you get for value. And the reality is, for that reason, it is my strong opinion that the tabletop role-playing game design community should really cap tabletop role-playing games at $4.99. 499 pages should be an unwritten rule, right, among game designers that you do not take books over that, right? It's not healthy for the industry, and I really don't, personally, I don't think it's healthy for games. And the reality is, I think Dungeons & Dragons too, right? Their longest book is 352, and the vast majority of their books are 256, right? And so I think that's strong evidence. And even beyond that, Zweihander and PF2, those books are not flying off the shelves. They truly are not, right? They're not selling really well, right? So all that is my opinion. What do you think? What do you think is a reasonable amount of pages for a tabletop role-playing game core rulebook in its print form? I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments below, please. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.